Folks, thank you so much for being early and for being on time. There's Nina, excellent. There's Shelby again. Hello, Shelby. And Brenda as well. Excellent. So we'll give it just another moment or two, folks, and then we will officially go ahead and get started. There are 20 of us here at this particular moment, which is fantastic. If you have ever been in a learning community with me or my colleague Diana Padilla before, I think you know that we ask you to type your full name and where you're from in the chat. So if you could go ahead and do that at this particular point, that would be great. You'll be ahead of the logistical curve. You can follow Judith's excellent and experienced example. Excellent. Thank you, Shelby. I'm aware of the time, folks, and this is a brief learning community conversation, 2 hours. So I want to go ahead and get started. I want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making the time to join this learning community conversation. My name is Paul, and I am very honored to have the opportunity to facilitate this learning community conversation. I am currently a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, also a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center, and very, very fortunate to have the opportunity to also be a member of the international organization MINT, the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, that focuses on the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. Very, very excited to have this opportunity to focus on this particular topic with the learning community. And in order to do that, we're going to take care of a couple of logistical details first, and then we will dive right into the content. So having said that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you would just indulge me, the 42 of you that are here would just indulge me. When you can see the title slide, just type the letter Y in the chat. I want to make sure that you're all able to see it. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that you are able to see the title slide, and you'll let me know by typing the letter Y in the chat, which means, yes, Paul, I can see the title slide. Fantastic. And it looks like just about everybody can see it. That's fantastic. Good. So again, there are 43 of us in the learning community. It is 44 now. It is possible that a couple of other folks may join us. This learning community conversation, I was inspired to develop this learning community conversation, being a facilitator of so many learning communities where there were many, 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 many folks who generously shared their lived experience and how their lived experience was part of their work. And that really inspired this course in the sense that the whole focus here is about effective sharing of lived experience while, of course, maintaining boundaries. And of course, boundaries that keep you, the person with lived experience, safe, and boundaries, of course, that keep the clients, patients, consumers safe, and also keep our work, the profession, and the organizations safe. So I do want to just underline this idea of effective sharing of lived experience while maintaining boundaries. And we're going to come back to that as a large group discussion topic after we take care of a couple of logistics. And I see that there are things coming in the chat. Yep, okay. So a couple of people have just joined us and they've put their name and where they're from in the chat. That's great. And anybody who's joining us, feel free, if you haven't done that yet, please type your full name in the chat and where you're from. If you're sharing your computer with anybody, please type their full name in the chat as well. Because we're a learning community, it is intentional that this conversation is meant to be relevant and beneficial to you. As we engage in this conversation, as you put things on the table, as I put things on the table, they may or may not reflect the official position of our funder, and that's okay because the funder wants this to be a supportive, relevant learning community conversation for everybody who has made the time to join us. As we engage in this conversation, an overarching guideline that I'd invite all of us to consider is that the words we use, how we actually talk to each other does really matter. It matters in this learning community. It matters outside of this learning community. And for our time together, a little less than 2 hours now, I'm going to invite all of us to consider and work toward using language that is respectful, welcoming, and inclusive of the richness and the diversity of our learning community. We want to put people first during our conversation. Welcome back. Some of you, I know I've had the opportunity, I'm thinking of Judith in particular, I've had the great opportunity to be in learning communities with before. This is the last time I'll officially say it, I guess. If you have not yet typed your full name into the chat, and where you're from, please do that. That is our, and this is the gesture that I always make, our timestamp of that you're here. If you stay until the end and you participate and complete your evaluation, we of course want to give you the 2 hours of credentialing credit. There will be a brief evaluation at the conclusion of our conversation, and I'm going to do my best. And those of you who know me know that sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail, but I will do my best to leave time at the end so everybody can complete the evaluation and then go on to their next meeting or their next appointment. So having said that, I will advance us to a couple of guidelines that I'd like us to consider. If you're able to, when you registered for this particular learning community conversation, you did agree to have a working camera and a working microphone and to be on camera during the conversation. If there's an accommodation that you're requesting, if there's some technical reason that you can't be on camera, just send me a direct message and let me know that. And I certainly respect that and I'm glad you're here. If you are able to turn on your camera and you can be on camera, please do that. There are now 49 of us, I think, in the learning community. And what I would ask, until you have something that you want to say, comment, share information, react to, I'm going to invite you to consider remaining muted. That way we won't have background noise. If during the course of this conversation, if there's something you want to say and I am in mid-sentence, don't hesitate to interrupt me. You're more than welcome to interrupt me. I would ask, though, that anybody other than me in the learning community, if they have the floor and they're sharing, please don't interrupt them. Please wait until they're finished. And I want to thank you all so much, folks. There are a couple of people who've sent me some private messages, and that's fine. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you for letting me know. And again, I'm glad you're here. Please participate in the chat and by unmuting if you're able to do that. So thank you for sending me those direct messages. Greatly appreciated. All right. So in addition to remaining muted until you have something that you want to say, again, not interrupting anybody other than me, you can interrupt me. This way we can listen to each other and we can offer each other that professional mutual respect. This particular learning community conversation is dedicated to honoring and centering the value and importance of lived experience and supporting the sharing of lived experience in an intentional and effective way. So again, I want to acknowledge that that's partly what this learning community space is for this learning community conversation. And I wanted to make that honoring and centering very intentional and very overt. And then the final guideline that I would ask people to consider is to please speak from the I. I had this experience. I believe this. I learned this. I know this. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to check the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. And again, folks, thank you for letting me know what your concerns are with the direct messages. Greatly appreciated. And again, I'm just glad you're here. I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment because I want to assure your agreement, commitment to these particular guidelines. So before we look at these goals, can everybody agree to those guidelines as stated? You can wave, nod, give a thumbs up, throw money, whatever works best for me. I mean you, whatever works best for you, just so we're excellent. Excellent. You can type yes in the chat. Some people type $signs in the chat. I take that as a yes. Fantastic. Excellent. So those are our guidelines, folks. Thank you so much. Thank you for agreeing to those, and thank you for being here for this conversation. I'm going to go back and share my screen one more time. We're going to just quickly review the goals and the learning objectives. And I want to, in a preparatory way, before I look at the goals and the learning objectives, thank you, Arthur, all in caps, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that, Arthur, capitalized is yes in the chat. That's a vigorous commitment. Oh, and $100. Fantastic. And Judith just shared a file. I'm not sure what the file is, Judith, but we'll certainly get a chance to look at it, hopefully. Can't hear you, Judith, if you said anything. Were you saying something?
It's just a wave.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Thank you. So, folks, I want to pose a preparatory question that I would like to let percolate for a moment before we sort of go. I'm going to go into the goals and objectives, but I want to throw out this percolating question as you're hearing the goals and objectives. Okay? And here's the percolating question. Well, let me ask first, does anybody recall verbatim? I do, and I can also show it. Does anybody recall what the full title of this learning community conversation is? What is the full? Yeah, go ahead, Branda. Go right ahead.
It's effective sharing of your lived experience. I can't remember what the rest of it is. That was my.
That's the beginning. Okay. Yeah, and Elisa wrote it in the chat, effective sharing of lived experience while maintaining boundaries. Okay, so here's the preparatory question that I want you to be thinking about, because there's something implicit about the title. Effective sharing of lived experience while maintaining boundaries. What I'd like you to be thinking about is, what does ineffective sharing of lived experience? How would you describe, and you don't need to put it in the chat, you don't need to, but I'm going to ask you to be thinking about this, and then I'm going to invite folks who'd be willing to comment on it to unmute. What is the opposite of effective sharing of lived experience? When does it become ineffective? So just let your mind percolate on that for a moment, okay? And we're going to come back to that. So just a pin, you don't need to type anything in the chat, just a pin, and we'll come back to it, okay? And again, we're focusing on effective sharing of lived experience while maintaining boundaries. And it can be helpful to think about why the emphasis on effective, because sometimes there's ineffective. So just keeping that in mind, I'm going to share my screen again. Our goals, ultimately, as a learning community, is to provide a place where folks who have lived experience and those who may not can reflect on the important contributions that people with lived experience actually make to the substance use disorder field and in many other fields too, not just substance use disorder. And if there's anything that I've learned from having the honor and opportunity to deliver this learning community conversation multiple times, is that our workforce of folks who have lived experience and offer that lived experience as a resource and an asset far exceeds just substance use disorder experience. Also, our goal is really to focus on the balance between effective, basically, self-disclosure and self-disclosure that is going to effectively meet the needs of the client and also do that in a very client-centered or person-centered way of disclosure. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. So to that end, hopefully to achieve those goals, we have these multiple objectives that we'll focus on. Again, hopefully we're going to be talking about some of the benefits of lived experience. If people choose, when they intentionally choose to share their lived experience, what's the rationale for that? How do you determine when is the time to offer your story or not? And what is the intention behind sharing one's story or experience if it's effective? Also, keeping in mind that when using lived experience, when making self-disclosures, it's very important to consider the role of supervision in that process. And in order to maintain being person-centered or client-centered, the idea of asking permission before asking questions, sharing information or your story, and offering information. And then hopefully people will talk a little bit about the process of self-reflection that they engage in before, during, and after self-disclosure. And again, that could be for somebody with or without lived experience. The idea that we are really engaging in a consistent practice of considering before we disclose, during the disclosure because we're attending or monitoring what's going on, and then after the disclosure. Now, I saw that a couple of things came in the chat, so let me just quickly check that before we get to our preliminary question. Yep, and Elisa, we're going to come to that, and Arthur, we're going to come to that as well. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment before I ask this additional preliminary question. And I just want to ask, any thoughts or reactions to the idea that I kind of posed as hey, Eric, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. That I posed for the ineffective sharing of lived experience or the less effective sharing of lived experience. Does anybody have any thoughts or reactions to that? And feel free to unmute if there's something you'd like to comment on or react to. I mean, would it be fair to say that that phenomena exists?
Yep. This
Yes.
is Lori.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
I find too you want to be careful with that because you don't want the client to feel like then they have to counsel or do therapy for you, reverse the tables.
Okay, so Lori is really Lori, thanks for starting us off because you're really underlining that a hallmark of ineffective use of lived experience is if there's a role reversal. Is that fair to say, Lori? Is that an okay way to frame it? That there's a role reversal that now the person you were disclosing to, they're now taking care of you.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. That they want to comfort you and yeah, it's human nature. So
Okay. 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 Yeah, Thank you so much, Lori. Go ahead, Elisa. Go right ahead.
I guess mine kind of like pinballs off of Lori's, but it's you're kind of like you take the light off of who you're supposed to be offering the support to as well. You know what I mean? It's it's okay to share what has happened to you, and in a way that may, like you said, be effective. But if it's not, it's kind of just taking it and shifting the energy towards you, and it really isn't supposed to be the case. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said that, Elisa, it made me think, and we're going to go to you right in just one moment, Nina, where the idea that like almost the spotlight shifts. Of course, we're working with the patient or the client, but then all of a sudden just the energy or the focus shifts. So not only do we not want the energy or the focus to shift, we also don't want the role to shift. Like Lori was saying, we don't want the person then having to take care of us. Fantastic. Go ahead, Nina, and then we're going to go to Arthur. And I saw that there were some things in the chat, so let's take a look at those too. Go ahead, Nina.
I find myself wanting to connect, and I need to realize that I can say a generic thing to understand rather than having to give specific details. That's something I have to monitor. Like sometimes I don't need to give the details for them to understand that I understand. And I have to watch that.
Yes. And I see Brittany and Reginald both nodding their heads as you said that. Sometimes I don't need to give the details. And Nina, I want to underline what you started with because I thought it was so honest, and it's part of the purpose of lived experience to connect. I want to connect, and I can make a decision about the level of detail that I'm going to share. And Nina, before we go to Arthur, could I ask you one quick follow-up question?
Sure.
If you have thoughts about this, or even if you've had this experience and you feel comfortable talking about it, have you observed, or could you imagine what the harms might be of sharing too much depth or too many specific details?
Well, I think it was Lori already said, then it becomes about me and not about the client.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both Elisa and Lori said that really the focus shifts to you and it becomes about you.
Mhm.
And that's a result of those details. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you. Yeah, Arthur, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, because a lot of people are more acceptable to a suggestion, not your opinion. So you have to be careful when you're sharing with someone to give a suggestion more or less than an opinion.
And Arthur, could I ask you a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Because I really appreciate the distinction you're making. And if you're offering a suggestion, how is that different than you telling me your opinion?
Because I'm using it as um I like I know someone who went through the same thing and they did it this way.
Okay.
It might work for you, it might not. You can try
Okay.
it. That's
Okay.
suggestive. Now I say you should do it this way because this is the only way it's gonna work. That's your opinion. So you see the difference.
I do. I do.
Yeah.
And I knew it was the right question to ask you to elaborate,
Hmm.
because one of those is directive. I'm
Yeah,
telling you what you should do.
exactly. Then I give you an example.
Sure.
It's part. That's how I can easily expose in a suggestion by giving an example of someone else doing it, been through the same situation, and this is how they handle it. You could try it this way. That's a
Yep.
suggestion. You could try it this way. It may work for you. That's how you approach them. But the negative aspect in that is your opinion. Yeah, you should do it this way because this is the way it should be done. No, nobody want to hear that. They'll just look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That Arthur, thank you so much. Greg, I'm wondering if you want to elaborate at all on what you put in the chat. And that's open to everybody, but Greg, I'm seeing yours right now. I just wonder if there's something you want to say about that.
Yeah, like when I'm meeting with a patient, rather than taking the focus off of them or giving too many details like we've talked about already, I try
Yeah.
to say something quick like, I totally get it. I totally get where you're coming from. I've been there myself, and leave it at that. I don't have to go into any more explanation. I can just say I've been there as well. I get what you're going through.
Yep. Yep. And I've been there too, makes what you said, Greg, and thanks for elaborating on it. It brought me back to what Nina said, because I've been there too, is a brief statement, how you say it, because you're probably not going to say it if it wasn't the case, but how you say it will carry some weight, and it can cause that person to feel some sort of connection. Okay, fantastic. Is there
One other
Go
just one
ahead,
other
go ahead.
detail. So
Yeah,
I
please go ahead, Greg.
just a perfect example. I go out with EMS all the time and I see patients out in the field, out in the community. And the one patient that I was seeing, the EMS, the paramedic was talking to the patient and giving, trying to help them, give them options and stuff like that. And they asked, if they had used anything that day, and the patient said no. And then he said, well, let me introduce you to my colleague, and introduced me and everything. And then I sat down and I talked with the patient. And I think it's more about the demeanor, sometimes what you're wearing, things like that. And when I was talking to the patient, I was able to say, like, is there anything that you use today? And they said, yeah. Like they opened up to me because of your demeanor. It's how you say the things, not what you're saying. So I realized, like, when I say that I can relate with you, or I've been there as well, or something like that, sometimes I'll even say something along the lines of, like, I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, because then I don't have to go into details of how I got there. They
Yeah.
just know that they're talking to somebody that will understand, because it's implied that I know exactly where they're coming from, not by giving any specific details.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if, and Greg, tell me if you're okay with this, even if we can't understand exactly where they're coming from, we can at least be open to where they're coming from because of our lived experience. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, and I think that another thing, we were joking around about it afterwards, the paramedic and I said, well, that's because you look like a rent-a-cop, and I look like a much more personable person because of how I present myself. He started laughing, but I was just joking. But in a way, somebody that's
Yeah.
going through those types of things, when they see somebody in a uniform,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I'm not going to talk to this guy. Maybe I'll get in trouble if I talk to them. But when you come from a place of like a level playing field,
Yeah.
they're a lot more likely to open up.
Yep. 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 And there's a word I'm thinking of. Greg, you made me think of this, and other people have made me think of this too. But there's a word I'm thinking of. It begins with an S, and it's related to what that person might feel talking to Greg, because they feel like they can relate to Greg, or that Greg is going to be open to them or understand them. And the word begins with an S. I'm wondering if anybody can think of the word. If you could use your yes.
Shame.
Actually, no, it was actually safe. That they might feel safe, or they might feel some degree of safety with that person. And they might actually not feel like they need to feel ashamed, because they might interact with Greg and feel like, well, you know what? Yeah, no judgments, Brenda. Yes, Brenda. There's no judgment coming from the person. So this may seem like a non-related question, but trust me, I'm going to make it relate. I'm pretty sure. Is there anybody in the learning community today who's currently in the state of Connecticut? Is anyone broadcasting to us from the state of Connecticut? And sometimes it happens, or does anybody live in Connecticut? Elisa says, no, I'm not from Connecticut. I'm not living in Connecticut. Is anybody from Connecticut? Okay. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The reason I ask is because when somebody says they're from Connecticut, I say, oh, I'm from Connecticut too. I grew up in a small town named Ellington. And if they then say, oh my God, I know where Ellington is. It's a little bit further north than where I'm from. I'm from, Middletown or wherever it may be. It's that thing that we have in common. And that's the piece I want to underline, folks. That's one of the powerful things about lived experience. Excellent. Dakota, I've been to Willimantic too. I used to take the train from there all the time. So now Dakota and I are a little bit closer. But of course, with lived experience, it can be more powerful. Okay? So it's that what we have in common. Arthur writes, that's why motivational interviewing is so important. Lead us with open-ended questions. Brittany says, it helps the working connection to build rapport. And if you can build rapport, what can follow rapport? And it begins with the letter T.
Trust.
Yes. Who said that?
I said it real loud.
Who said that? Who is that? Yeah, it's trust.
I don't even have one. Oh, I have on my speaker. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, Arthur. Thank you. I'm glad Arthur just said it out loud. Fantastic. So you can potentially start to build trust. Okay. And I want to bring it back to, and Branda, I think you put this in the chat, but I want to go back to the idea of that part of that trust is also about no judgment. That we don't want to be judging. We want to be aware of any judgments that we may have and not act them out with the person. Having said that, I'm going to share my screen again. Really glad to know that Dakota and I have both crossed through that particular town in Connecticut. What I will tell you, just one other thing about Connecticut, where I grew up, is that there were more cows when I grew up in my small town than there were people. So, maybe you grew up in a farming community, and that's something we might have in common. Yes, Giovanni, trust. That's what we were going for. All right. So I just want to throw this idea out, and I'd be very curious to hear your reactions. So what we have in common can help a person feel safe. It can lead to some degree of safety. It can help the person to open up or engage more, and it can grow or build trust. And I'm just curious, and you can, communicate this by nods, direct deposits, whatever works for you. But what are your thoughts about that? That if you can find that common ground, it can invite the person to open up. It can build rapport. It can. So would you say you agree with that? Yeah. Okay. So some people are giving thumbs up. Okay. Jeremy gives a big thumbs up. Jeremy, do you want to say anything about your thoughts about that? Are you able to unmute? Would you be willing to say anything? I saw your thumb. Just wondered if you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I was just giving a thumbs up because it really rings true for me, I would say.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say that that's one of the assets, one of the profound benefits of lived experience? And, Greg, I'm thinking of what you said. You might say to somebody, without the details, and I'm thinking of Nina, without the details, you might say something like, I'm a person in long-term recovery. So the person may feel like, oh, well, maybe Greg can understand me, or at least maybe he's open to me. Dakota writes, generally sharing lived experience promotes connection, understanding, validation, and empathy if done in a safe and trusting environment. Dakota, Branda's applauding that, Dakota. So, and as is Nina. And if anybody else wants to break into applause, but I do. I'm wondering if you would say a little bit more, Dakota, if you're able to. I don't know if you can unmute, but if you'd be willing to say a little bit more, and you've got some hearts and some thumbs up and some other clapping electronically, if you'd be willing to say what you mean by a safe and trusting environment. And then we're going to go to Greg. But Dakota, if you're able to unmute, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that you
Yeah,
can. Go
I
ahead.
am.
Okay.
I'm taking a bow. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Fantastic.
I just think that setting maybe boundaries up front, and I'm in the public health sector, so I don't necessarily deal directly with people every day. But I in my own sense have lived experiences. So I always find this really informative. So I always think I would say setting clear boundaries before a session and letting a person know that it is a safe place to share, and then maybe being upfront, before a person even maybe has their first session, like, and just being like you said, I'm a person in recovery, knowing what they're getting into. And then they walk in knowing, hey, this person has been there before. I can share everything that I feel comfortable with. Because I do think that not sharing could cause isolation and misunderstanding and stigma reinforcement. So I'm a very big supporter of sharing lived experiences with, boundaries and safe
Yeah.
messaging.
Thank you.
That
So
answers.
it does, and thank you for the elaboration. With boundaries, while maintaining boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead, Greg. I guess I chose the right title for the course then.
I was just going to say, so kind of building off of what I was saying before, I've also had this situation where when I tell a patient that, I'm a person in long-term recovery, they will say something like, well, what worked for you? And you have I had to make sure that there's a very clear distinction that when they say what worked for you, it's not opening up an opportunity for you to tell them what to do. You also have to say, like I say, I'm like, it's one of the many things that I say over and over again, but like there's a million different ways to the top of a mountain, just like there's a million different ways to get recovery. This is what worked for me. I usually preface it by saying something along those lines so that they know that even though it worked for me, I know, so like, just to be fully open with you guys, like I'm not a person that did MAT. I didn't do Suboxone or methadone, excuse me, but I do know a lot of people that worked for. When I first started in my job, I was not fully on board with being supportive of that. But now through seeing so many success stories with things like that, I encourage it, even though it wasn't what worked for me. And I'm very clear, like, what worked for me might not work for you. And what works for you might not have been the path that I took. But you have to be very clear to make that distinction that if I am sharing what worked for me, it's not like a cure-all. You know what I mean? So I did want to say, when you say that, it is going to open up a question like, well, what did work for you? Or somebody like me who loves to talk about myself, I like to overshare about what I went through that led me to the solution that I found. So you kind of have to be very self-aware in how you respond to, well, what worked for you.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And Arthur, before we come to you, I just want to underline a couple of things that Greg said. And Shelby, I saw that you were applauding. So if you want to unmute and say something about what you're applauding, but I want to underline a couple of things that Greg said, because first of all, Greg, I'm sure you're the only person in this learning community who loves to talk about themselves and the process they went through to get where they are. I'm sure you're completely alone in that experience. I'm kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. And you're aware that that that's who you are and that that's what you want to do. So underlining that part of effective use of lived experience is self-awareness. Being really, really self-aware. Branda, please come to every learning community conversation that I deliver. It's so nice to see people react to the different things that are being said, and you're a very good reactor. The other thing that I wanted to underline, and I wanted to link this to what Dakota said a moment ago about a safe and trusting environment. Greg painted the scenario person says he makes the appropriate and limited disclosure about his recovery experience. And that prompts the person because maybe they feel a connection. Oh, Greg's from Ellington too. You know what I mean? But Greg and I have this in common. Okay. So they feel that connection to Greg. And then they say to Greg, like, well, Greg, maybe you're a little further along in the process than me. I would really like to know what worked for you. Now, that's a direct invitation. A direct invitation. And the thing that I really want to underline in terms of what can help make what Greg says next safe, Arthur, please don't lose your thought, is that Greg is underlining before he makes any kind of disclosure, he's underlining, and this can lead to safety. He's underlining, there are a million roads that get to the same outcome or the same address. What I can tell you is one road that I took, and of course, everybody finds their road. And again, then being appropriate and limited, intentional about what you do say about your road. I love it too, Liz, and that's really why I wanted to underline it, because that is a great way to, I'm going to say it this way for those of you who love motivational interviewing, it's a great way to affirm that individual's autonomy. And what you were also saying, Greg, was very related to what Arthur said before about suggestions and opinions, being directive or helping a person to find what's right for them. Yeah. Arthur, thank you so much for your patience. The floor is yours. Go right ahead.
Greg, I commend you on what you were saying, and I love it. The thing about this is that for one, when we telling our life experiences, basically when it gets to the how did you do it? The definitive word is how, with honesty, open-minded, and willingness. That's where it starts. First, you got to be honest with yourself about you have a problem. It's a situation, struggling with a situation, and open-minded enough to take my suggestion, to take my instruction, and then be willing to do it. So when they ask how did you overcome it? This is how. First, you have to start with honesty, open-minded, and willingness.
Yep. And everybody finds their own unique way into that. And you know something? If I'm having a conversation with Nina and Nina tells me something that helps me to realize, oh, maybe Nina and I have this in common. As I get to know Nina, as I start to build rapport with Nina, I might trust her this much at first, but then I might trust her this much and then this much. So the details of what I share may increase as the rapport and the trust sort of builds. So until the person feels they can trust me, I don't ever expect that they should trust me. That's their determination, not my determination. Shelby, did you want to comment on your reaction to what Greg said?
Yeah, I just thought that it was a perfect way to summarize everything because recovery is very personal and your road to recovery is very personal to you. So it's hard not to want to say, this is what I did and it's so great. But knowing that everybody has their own path, and we should just keep that in mind before wanting to share what we did.
Yeah, and again, what a great way to keep the comment safe, what follows. Everybody has their own path, their own unique path, and I can share a bit of what mine is. And Jillian wrote in the chat, I often say, do the next right thing. And Jillian, tell me if you're okay with this. I might add, do the next right thing for you. Because the next right thing for you might not have been the next right thing for me. And everybody
Absolutely.
finds, you're okay with that, Jillian?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Arthur S., go right ahead. The floor is yours. Oh, I don't know. Did Arthur S. change his mind?
No.
Arthur. Yeah,
All
there
right.
you go, Arthur. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback what Greg said, right? I mean, it was very enlightening what I heard him say because I always tell somebody like when they ask me what worked for me, I tell them like first of all, not in a negative way. When we got to the place where we was at, we took certain journeys, right? So I try to use an analogy like, okay, if I live in Tennessee and you live in California, and our goal is to get to the somewhere out west somewhere, right? What's that in Arizona? I forgot, but any your way, right?
Yeah.
I probably drive. If I get in my car, if I'm in Tennessee, I probably drive. I probably drive west. The person who west, no, if I was in the east, I would get in the plane and then fly west. And the person who west would probably fly east,
Yeah.
right? And it's not about. It's gonna be different altitude, different speed, different scenery, right?
Yeah.
Everything will be different about the journey.
Yep.
But the goal is, right, to arrive at a destination safe.
Yep.
The same way in recovery, right? It's
Yeah.
the same goal we have, right? Everybody want to be clean and sober. So if I'm going somewhere like Vegas, for instance, right, and a person, like I said, person I'm in LA, maybe a 2-3 hour drive. Me in Tennessee, I'm gonna fly in the airplane. But the goal is to get there safely.
That's right.
it. And each person's journey is going to be different. But
Yep.
it's not about the journey, though. It's how we get there and how we arrive there. As long as everyone to know in one piece, safe and sound. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you so much. And you know, Arthur, as you were talking, it really made me think too that one of the things about the power of lived experience, and again, that clear message of that, you know, we know the location is Vegas. Based on where we are, how we get there is going to be unique. But that's one of the powers of lived experience. It can give people the hope and the courage to actually find their direction, to go in their particular direction. Because Branda did it, Shelby did it, Greg did it. They did it their way, but they're okay. So maybe I can figure out what's going to be the okay way for me to get to Vegas. Yeah, go ahead, Branda. Go right ahead.
You know, I often tell people, you know, when they do or when they do ask me, you know, how did you do it? How did you overcome these obstacles? How did you, you know, get through um the challenges that you face to try to stay sober? How did you handle your triggers? Things like that. And I have always kind of just let them know, you know, that they got to figure it out through suggestions, people that they hang around. If it, you know, if they want to be sober, they need to hang around with sober people. If they want to, you know, hang around with people you aspire to be like, pretty much is, you know. And so I feel like that's like really powerful when I share that, because if we're gonna not, you know, if we want to stay sober, we can't hang out with our older friends and things like that, like, right? Because I always used to say they were my friends, but they were my acquaintance, right? And so when I got sober, they became my acquaintance. I know them, I know of them. Now I'm 15 years in, right? And so they don't know me like they used to, right? I no longer am that person. That person may still be there, right? Okay, I have to carry her with me every single day of my life, but that's the beautiful thing about it, is that I don't have to go back to that person. I've recreated myself. And I always share with clients to figure out a way to recreate themselves, to figure out a way to build themselves into the person that they aspire to be like, because you know, I always just share, you know, this is not your purpose. This is not what you were meant to do. You can't make your mark this way, right?
Mhm.
And this
Mhm.
isn't the legacy you want to leave for yourself or your kids or your family or, you know, what have you. And, you know, but you only have to do it one little bitty baby step at a time. Like, it doesn't have to be this huge mountain that you have to jump onto. It doesn't have to go quickly. I always talk to clients about a toolbox, right? Sometimes we learn things from other people. They'll share their suggestions, they'll share their ideas, right? They'll, when we make recovery plans and things like that, they'll share these things that they did. I'll share my experience. We all reach the destination differently, very uniquely, and with our own tools. And the ideas and suggestions that we grab out there, we grab the ones that we think work for ourselves, we put them in our toolbox, and we apply them to the rest of our life. If they're not workable in our life, we leave them because them are meant to be for somebody else.
Yep. And that's the keep what you like and leave the rest, right?
Yep.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you so much, Branda. So a number of wonderful things coming in the chat, and the idea about doing the right thing, you get results. Doing the wrong thing, you get consequences. Everyone's process is different. There are many ways to recover and many ways to grow, because it's about growth and recovery. And Arthur S. also writes, you cannot have a positive life and a negative mind. And again, because the thinking does have an impact on it as well. Branda said something, though, that I really want to underline in terms of one of the other benefits of lived experience. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the journey and how the journeys are different. And it would probably be fair to say, if we're going to use Arthur S.'s analogy of the destination, no two people's Vegas is the same either. Your growth, your recovery is unique to you, just like it'll be unique to somebody who chooses to move in that particular direction. Branda, you mentioned this, and I just want to put an underline under it, because I think it's one of the powerful elements and it's when you were talking about how whom you associate with starts to kind of build who you grow to. And that's that lived experience, and people who are employed and their lived experience is employed, they are role models. You are actually modeling for people that, and again, you're not modeling that this is what they should do. What you're modeling is that this is what's possible. And it's back to the hope piece of it. So I'm going to share my screen. A couple of things to consider as we continue in this conversation. And to some degree, we've touched on some of these already, but I wanted to show you this quote and just get a sense of if anybody has any reactions or thoughts about this quote, and if you'd be willing to unmute and say anything about them. And I'm going to pause and let you read it. I'm confident that there are many people in our learning community who are very familiar with this quote. I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts or reactions that they'd like to share about it.
Is that from AA literature?
It is.
Yeah, I've read that quite a bit.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Any thought or reaction to it, Greg?
I mean, I completely, like, I live my life around the 12 steps of AA, so it's something that's very relatable for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts, any other reactions? Yeah, go ahead, Brittany, please, go right ahead. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. So when I read that, I thought automatically of post-traumatic growth. I know that there's not a whole lot of study behind it and stuff, but that is something that, my own therapist has told me that I have, and that they're like, yeah, you've been through this and it was bad, it was terrible, it was whatever, but you're not letting that bring you down. You're using that to make sure that you're going up, and you're sharing with everybody else your story, your success, to inspire others.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Thank you. And yes, what a beautiful way to think of it, post-traumatic recovery or post-traumatic growth. And there are two things I want to and I'll show the quote again, Tony, so you can see it. But Brittany, two things I want to underline in terms of what you specifically said. You yourself are continuing to grow in addition to your growth being able to help other people too. And that's the beauty of the intentional and effective use of lived experience, that you actually, you're continuing to do your own growing, and you're also, through your intentional sharing of that lived experience, you're actually supporting and modeling other people's growth as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Brittany, thank you so much for adding that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm going to just show the quote one more time because Tony didn't see it. And Dakota writes, it's a powerful and healing mindset. It shifts the focus from shame, which one of our colleagues mentioned earlier, to growth. It reminds us that even painful experiences can have purpose when we use them to help others, which is exactly what Brittany was saying as well. And here's the quote again. And I'll read it out loud too. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. Thank you for commenting on that, folks. So a couple of things to keep in mind about lived experience. It's very personal. It's very unique. It's real, all caps. It's a part of your life. And Brandy, you mentioned that. And it could run the whole spectrum of emotions from pain to joy and everything in between. And it's an ongoing journey. Antoinette writes, giving hope to others that may be hopeless. Yes. Giovanni adds, you can never neglect your past. I think maybe that's past, Giovanni, but can only use it to help you grow as an individual and help others grow. Arthur C. also says, when you're on the road of recovery, you mostly change holistically. Yep. Thank you for commenting on that. So keep in mind too, that that's just an overarching idea of lived experience. Then there's what we might call informal lived experience, where maybe your family, your friends, and it's your personal recovery, people in your family, your friends, you choose who you're going to share your lived experience with, and it's about your personal recovery. You don't get any financial compensation for that. And there are no quote unquote enforced standards. So you're free to talk about yourself as much as you may wish to do. And then there's what I would throw out for all of us to consider, and this is why we're talking about the effective use of lived experience while maintaining boundaries, is we're really talking about employed lived experience, where you may work for an agency, or you might be part of a program, or you're part of service delivery. And the asset, the benefit, the healing of your lived experience is something that you as you do this work in an agency, a program, or services, you may receive financial compensation. Judith, I'll give you the floor in just 1 second. And the whole idea that when you're employed and your lived experience is part of that employment, there are standards that are to be met and maintained so that you're intentional and effective about the use of your lived experience. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go right to Judith. Go ahead, Judith, the floor is yours. Thanks for adding your voice. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so sometimes I will be sharing, my testimony, but I won't identify it as me. I could say something like, yeah, I had a friend once that did blah, 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 and this is how they got sober. Or I had a relative one time and they did it this way and da 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 da, like maybe give like 3 different examples of something. And sometimes it could be me, but I'm not saying it's me. I'm just saying, I knew somebody.
Mhm. Judith, can I ask you a follow-up question in regard to that?
Sure.
Because I have a feeling you're probably not alone in that. And I'm wondering what your rationale, why you may choose to say, well, someone that I knew or someone that I worked with or someone in my family, as opposed to saying you, because that is different.
Mm-hmm.
That is different. And I'd be very curious if you'd be willing to comment as to why and when you kind of make the decision to frame it that way. You are using your lived experience, but you're not necessarily connecting it to you.
Sometimes clients will deflect. Like maybe I don't know how they might respond. I've had different comments at different times.
Yep.
Oh, like you think you're just better, like, or something like that. Or so
Right.
I had just made a decision at one point that I'll still share, but I won't share that it's me.
Right. Because you don't, I thank you for elaborating. You're very clear about you don't want it to become some sort of comparison between
Mm-hmm.
you and them. You may want them to understand the concept, but you don't want the comparison.
Right.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Arthur writes, your past is your past, and that's where it belongs. But I do look in that rear view mirror once in a blue moon to remind myself. Yeah. And Arthur S., thank you so much for putting that in the chat, because I want to underline that when you do intentionally, selectively share your lived experience, you actually are looking back at your past. You actually are, because that was your past. That was possibly part of your story. And it's important to consider what the impact. Yeah, go ahead, Branda. Go right ahead. Go right ahead. Yeah.
For myself, when I'm working, I work 5 days a week. I'm a certified peer recovery coach here at Community Mental Health. I work with clients on the daily. And, when I first got sober, that was something that God put on my heart. I want to help people help themselves, right? And because I don't want to see anybody stuck in this dark place that I've been in, right? And it was really ugly, and it was very painful, and it was a life that I don't choose to live anymore. And when I work with a client out in the community or even family, friends, or whatnot, I often I don't feel shame for that life anymore, because I have made beauty of it, beauty of the ashes. And sometimes it helps people, sometimes they don't want to be helped, but I plant the seed. Right. And if I can plant that seed, and if I can plant that seed as many times as possible, that was my ugly story, but I've turned it into something that I'm I can be proud of, right? I can be proud that this is the journey that I have chose to that was chose, I chose this. I chose this life, right? And I made those choices that put me in that position, but I've also made that choice, all those choices that put me to where I am today. And like I said, I've made beauty of the ashes. And so that life has equipped me to do this work. And I have a lot of passion for what I do. And when I'm working with people, yeah, it gets me like teary, because like I could have never imagined who I was to who I become and what I do for a living. So I think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful transition for myself, you know, that I constantly am sharing with clients that you don't have to live in this darkness and that pain and in that place, because you can grow. You have that choice, right? And regardless of, the sickness can be so deep, right? And it can be so ingrained in us. You got to heal your mind so you can heal your body, you know. And like I said, that reinvention, you know, that it was beautiful. It was bumpy, but beautiful.
Yes, yes, and you know, Daniela used a word in the chat that I really want to underline, and Brittany just used also another word that I want to underline in the chat, which is empowerment, helping people to find their power. And the word that Daniela used was transformative. And I just want to underline this, and you can all, you know, boo, hiss, throw electronic rocks at me if you want, but I want to say this, which is that whenever you intentionally make the choice to share your lived experience, it has an impact on you. And it requires you being aware and making sure that you're still okay. So I just wanted to underline that, because sharing your lived experience is offering something very valuable, and it has an impact. And that's partly why we want to have this conversation, because you want to be able to do it with boundaries, and you want to be able to do it with intention, so you can keep doing what you're doing. So you can keep planting that seed, so you can stay mentally and physically and spiritually healthy. Okay, that's the purpose to have this conversation. That's the purpose to be in this learning community, to be reminded of that. What you're doing has in extraordinary transformative power, and it has consequences of your doing it. Does anybody want to throw anything at me for saying that or push back on that? Okay, I'm open. Yeah, go ahead, Branda.
I think that was a really good point to make, that it does make us aware when I'm working with consumers, listening to the stories, listening to the news, listening to everything that's going on that surrounds addiction. It takes me back to that. I do that check-in with myself, like, am I taking care of myself? Am I doing my self-care? Am I seeking therapy? Am I doing my meditation readings? Because here's the thing, right? We are working and we give so much when we are working. And I think that sometimes we get in we're so in it that when we leave, like for myself, when I leave work, I'm like, I feel almost a little depleted, right? And so I'll turn on my fill me up music, and I'll jam out, or I'll call somebody or something, because I need to check in, because, you know, that is heavy. It's heavy work, right? And it can be very heavy, and we can get that secondary trauma working with clients, and we need that check-in.
Yeah.
It also kind of puts in the forefront of just how bad it has gotten since I got sober, and it makes me shift to that. You know, it checks me at that point where You know, like, even if I'm stressed out, I'm not willing to go there for myself. Do you know what I mean? Ever again, because it's just been like, you know what I mean? So it helps me stay sober a little bit too, doing those check-ins, hearing the experiences. It's a reminder. It's a reminder, all yet painful, but it's a reminder.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And again, it's important to have those reminders
yeah.
because you want to be able to keep doing what you're doing. And you also want to stay physically, emotionally, and spiritually healthy while you're doing that. That's the reason to have this conversation, folks. First and foremost. Arthur, I'm going to give you the floor. Go right ahead.
Yeah, you have to be careful about becoming emotionally attached to your clients because it can affect you beyond the job. Like for example, I have a friend that was a social worker for child services,
Yeah.
and she used to take home that emotional um thing with her, the seeing abused children and all that. She used to go break down when she got home. So she had to seek therapy after that and
Yep.
maybe medication. But
Yep.
that's the one thing you have to be careful of because it can be trying, it can be challenging, but you have to have that boundary or emotional connection.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Arthur. And on the heels of what Arthur and Branda both said, I do want to make a painfully obvious statement, which is that your well-being, your safety, your ability to keep doing this work has to come first. If you don't put on your mask first, you can't assist others in putting on theirs. And especially if you're bringing to the table such a personal and powerful resource. So just keeping that in mind. Yeah, comes through trial, error, and reflection. Yes, absolutely. It couldn't be better said. Yeah, Nina, go ahead. The floor is yours.
It's just ironic. I don't have lived experience for addiction, but mental health and children's services also is the work that I do.
Very wide field, right?
So this morning, a client was sharing a situation and then she became triggered. And so we just did a little brief meditation. And then afterwards, she shared a different one with me. And I was just like, this is so awesome. I don't think she even realized that she helped me by showing me just a 10-second, mindfulness meditation kind of thing. And I needed it more than I realized until after I had received it. And but me introducing one to her was also healing for myself. Just to model it for her was a powerful moment this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and that is why self-care is so important. Brenda writes in the chat, working with people in recovery does not equal my recovery. I'm still responsible to continue, and this is Brenda J wrote this. I'm still responsible to continue my own recovery journey. Yes, because recovery is ongoing, and self-care. Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And invite you to consider. So we've talked about these benefits. Again, one of the powerful benefits, the in common experience, shared language, respect we can offer the person. And I'm thinking of our colleague who mentioned shame early on. We can offer that respect and the person can maybe let go of some of their self-stigma or shame. Expedited understanding, sometimes firsthand understanding. We may have had very similar experiences. Credibility, the fact that the person can be like, oh, this person has credibility because they've been there too. And the idea of trust can grow based on that. Also modeling, and we've also talked about the idea that sometimes we can offer informed suggestions or advice, and we are sometimes models of hope. Now, something just came in the chat before I go forward. I just want to make sure that I check that. Okay, good. You were reacting to what Brenda said. Okay. So we've begun to touch on this. Remember that in common effect is the foundation that can lead to openness, can lead to rapport, can lead to the development of trust. And we want to keep in mind that once we've had that connection, that point of connection through the in common, we can maybe let these 4 things guide us. And this is how we are after we make that connection. We can choose to be in a partnership with that person versus telling them that we know best. We can certainly choose to accept that person and not judge them. We can also offer compassion to the person versus what our colleague mentioned of giving them directives. And we can empower them to find their journey, and I'm going to use our colleague's metaphor here. We can empower them to find their way to Vegas, as opposed to telling them, this is what you've got to do if you want to accomplish this. So just keeping that in mind as a framework. Also, some of the things that we disclose are our stories, what we did. And when you do disclose your story, my question to you is, oops, hold on a second. I'm going to stop sharing. I think I did. You no longer see the slide, right? Good, very good, very good. Good. We'll go back to it in a minute. But when you share your stories, when you share a bit of your story, why are you doing it? What is your thought about that? Why are you doing it? Yeah, Kelly's giving it some thought there. Kelly, do you want to unmute and say anything? Daniela says for connection, and that's true. Maybe that's that in common point. Why else? Kelly may be putting something in the chat. Liz says rapport. Okay. Trying to get rapport. Okay. Okay. Building relationship. Understanding. Yeah, go ahead, Judith. What do you think?
To give the client hope that it's possible, that you can get clean, you can make this work, that
Yeah.
you don't have to stay the way you are. You can change your story through, counseling, therapy, NA, AA, smart recovery. There's all different ways a person can do it based on what they like.
Yeah. And based on their right road to Vegas. Yeah. Elisa writes, to help that person through their hard time, give hope and encouragement. Yamilet says, create a safe space, give hope. Antoinette says, to share hope, let them know it's a better way. Kelly says, releasing the pressure, that's part of your self-awareness, and to build that trust with the other person you are trying to show by example. Absolutely, Kelly. And Elisa also adds to let them know that there are community resources and connections and support. Yep. And letting them know they're not alone, Daniela says. What does anybody, Kelly, you're nodding your head awfully vigorously at that. Do you want to unmute and comment on that? You're not sure how to unmute. You're having difficulty unmuting. There you
Oh, there
go.
it goes. I think I got it.
You
Sorry.
got it.
I did. Okay. Yeah. I was nodding on the part where it says so you don't feel alone, because it's basically, I think for my own situation, when I was trying to get sober,
Yes.
and I struggled for multiple years, but the last segment of that, which I call story, was the most loneliest part, I think, of my life. And then once I started to reach out is when I didn't feel so alone. And I started to trust and be able to have communication that wasn't, under the influence. Because, you know, when you're an addict or, you know, whatever your situation is, you're most of the time your brain, until you're at least 9 months, it doesn't come back to even having a normal, rememberable conversation.
Mhm.
That's my experience.
Yeah, thank you. And the fact that you came out of that aloneness or that isolation,
Mhm.
that connection is what actually put you on the road toward your recovery.
Yeah, it's that love and the compassion. It all, it's that, just that triangle of just starting with love and patience. You know, just have to have patience for the other person. It could take them 5 years when it might have only taken you a year, but you
Yeah.
need to just continue to love them and continue to not give up on them.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I want to throw out this concept, and I'm very curious if anybody has any thoughts about what I mean by auto disclosure. I'll say what I mean by it, but does anybody? I'm throwing it out there. Does anybody have any thoughts about what you think the term auto disclosure means? Any thoughts about what you think I might mean by that auto disclosure?
Not intentionally disclosing.
Yes, beautifully said, Wendy. Not intentionally disclosing. Okay. And Judith writes, it means oops. Like maybe I said too much or I shouldn't have said something there. Any other thoughts about what I mean by auto disclosure? All of the above so far. Getting caught up, getting caught up in the moment, Brenda says. Somebody unmuted. Go ahead, Greg. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say maybe disclosing something without having to use your words, maybe by your demeanor.
Yeah, there are some disclosures that are inadvertent by your demeanor, by your appearance, all of that. Yep. Yeah. Any other thoughts about auto disclosure? What you think I might mean? Go ahead.
It could
Yeah.
mean disclosing more than you originally intended to.
Yes. So you're not paying attention to the amount that you're just. Brenda J is nodding her head in regard to this. Yeah. But you ended up disclosing more than you actually intended to disclose. Yes. Spontaneously revealing information about oneself, Daniela says. Antoinette says, talk too much. It's always about you until the point the client is not important. And we talked about that switch of focus, or the roles change. Client's taking care of you now. I wanted to introduce this idea because I want to warn against it. The idea that just disclosing because, well, you know, I'm a peer educator, I'm a peer community specialist. I just want to, yeah. And Elisa, I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Elisa, maybe Elisa wants to say something too, but Elisa wrote in the chat, it can happen quick. And I would agree with that too. So I'm wondering if you want to say anything about that, Elisa. You may not. You may want to just let that stand on its own, but I would agree it can happen quick. Yeah, go ahead, Brenda J. Go ahead. Brenda J is in the process of unmuting. I can tell she's working it out.
There we go.
And then we're going to go to
trying
Dakota.
unmute.
Go ahead,
You know,
Brenda.
it's like sometimes in group they start talking about things, and you know, things just start coming out, and I have to be really careful and be mindful to reel them back in. Okay, we're not going to be talking about that. Let's move on. This is what the topic is today. Let's get back on topic, because it's real easy for them to get distracted, and you know, they think it's fun, and you know, we tend to remember all the fun stuff and how, you know, oh, this was crazy, and you know, but and sometimes people look at me and they're like, oh, you couldn't have ever been like that, you know,
Mhm.
but
Yep.
I
Yep.
have stories too, but you know, it's like I'm here to show you how to change, and so that we don't have to do that anymore. So we
Right.
aren't going back to jail. We're not going back to prison. We're not losing our kids, you
Right.
know,
Or potentially risking our lives.
and risking our lives. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brenda, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to say this, that some of our stories, and Brenda, you can totally tell me you don't agree with this if you don't, but some of our stories are not appropriate for use when we're employed in a way to sort of support clients and build recovery. Not that the stories are bad, they're just not appropriate to the work that we're doing.
Yes.
Are you okay with
Yes,
that?
our war stories. Yes, that's and they'll it tries to get. That's why I came to this training today, because it's easy to get sucked in sometimes, and you know, not share too much.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're going to go to Dakota and then we're going to go to Branda. But I do want to touch back on something that Wendy said early on, which is that we want to be sure that we're being intentional about these disclosures. We don't want to take them for granted. Our lived experience has an impact, it's valuable, and we want to be intentional about it. Dakota, the floor is yours, and then we'll go to Branda.
So I guess this is more of a question because I know
Yeah.
we're talking about like auto
Disclosure.
disclosures.
Yeah.
It's obviously more verbal. But I've been to so many trainings that are always so informative, but then they, you know, I'm on this like compass of like, huh. And I've heard or seen, because like again, I don't work directly with people, but like nodding your head could be like an, you know, like a
Yeah.
disclosure of being like, and then I just like to reiterate what Antoinette said, like sometimes just listening. And it's like trying to like your first instinct is wanting to nod your head to be like, yes, like I agree, I'm with you. This is good. And it's supposed to be supportive, but I don't know. So my question is, you know, could that be sort of more of a um, you know, nonverbal disclosure that I don't know. I don't
Yeah, you know, I think you're raising a very similar question that Greg raised, and I think it's a valuable one to put on the table and for all of us to consider, is the idea of there are ways to disclose that go beyond words. And they can be our demeanor, they can be our tone of voice, they can be a nod of the head, our nonverbal communication. And again, we want to go back to the purpose of why we're offering a disclosure, be it nonverbal, be it our demeanor, be it our words. We always want to be coming back to why are we disclosing and why are we choosing to disclose at any given moment. And what I'm asking us to consider as a learning community is raising our awareness and going back to what Wendy said earlier, the idea that we want to be intentional about that. So that means we have to be paying attention and reflecting on, well, you know, what was the impact? How did that client respond? Was it, and as somebody, and I think it was Antoinette who said this, we learn through trial and error. We learn through discussions with our supervisor. We learn through trusted conversations with our colleagues like Brenda or Elisa or Greg. By reflecting, by talking possibly, if it's in the 12-step context, by possibly talking with our sponsors or our therapist, depending on, you know, what we're focused on. So Dakota, I think you're raising a valuable question. And again, it's about self-awareness, reflection, and attending on the reaction of the client in some ways. Branda, you are very patient. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, you know, in the, let me lower my hand before I forget. I just wanted to say in the event, because, you know, we're all professionals out here, right? We didn't start that way. And we have made mistakes, right? And so, you know, like oversharing or auto disclosure or something, when I have caught myself, or still sometimes I will catch myself, like, you know, I'm pretty better at it now that I've been in the field for 10 years. But when I was 3, 4, 5 years in, or 2 months in, or it was, you know, I had to catch myself, and I had to, um, what I would typically do and what I still do is if I overshare or I, you know, kind of auto disclose, and if I catch myself doing it, I always try to revert back to, um, like if I overshare, I'll say, but this is why we don't do this like this anymore because we've changed, or you know what I mean? Or I'll try to go back to, you know, this is the, this is the part of addiction that that we want to change from, these behaviors, this language, this, and I'm pretty good at catching myself, like, you know, and if I have overshared and you know, it impacts the client in a way that they're like, oh my God, right? And I'm like, I didn't mean to disclose so much. And I will say, you know, you know, that I didn't mean to disclose that much, and give them a valid reason for doing so, and that we, you know, we can discuss it, you know, and sometimes I've had to apologize, right? Or I mean, you know, it's the field that we're in. You know, I'm better about it now because, you know, I've kind of tailored back, you know, I'm not going to share my horror stories. We don't want to glorify what our addiction looks like. And I say this, right? You know, I'll say we don't want to glorify that, you know, because then it just kind of takes us back to when we're glorifying it, it's fun again. And we don't want it to be fun because it's not fun, right? It sucks, right? And so that, you know what I mean? And so I mean, I have had to have them hard conversations, you know, in the past, and when I do. So I just kind of try to rectify it the best I possibly can. I've never really did a real big doozy, but you know, I have over disclosed, you know, in my 10 years out here. So
Thank you, Branda. And, you know, again, it's about progress, not perfection. It's about authenticity and accountability. And we can, you know, say, oh, I went too far. Let's go back. And that's about redrawing a boundary with yourself. I'm going to turn it over to Reginald and then Elisa, and then I'm going to share my screen again. Reginald, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I want to make 2 quick comments that I hope will
Please.
be helpful.
Yeah.
So I've been in the field for 30 years, over 30 years, and I've been the director of 5 different programs, and I was a counselor. So from my own experience, I know that, and for many of us, when we first come into the field, we don't know any better, and we will self-disclose in the early stages in order to start that rapport, to engage, to make that connection. And so it's so easy for us to say, oh, you did this, I did this. You shot dope, I shot dope. You smoke crack, I smoke crack. You was on Rikers, I was on Rikers. Yeah, that's what we don't know any better. No one has taught us anything. And over time, hopefully we learn that self-disclosure is typically done as a last resort and only when it's in the best interest of the client. Because once we start self-disclosing, the moment we start talking about ourselves, the attention comes off the client and goes on to us. And that's not what we should be doing. So we learn that over time. We have to be aware of our tone. We have to be aware of our nonverbal communication. And we need to be aware of the things that we say, our verbal communication. But we learn that hopefully over time with supervision and guidance. And we will make mistakes and we will over disclose. So that's just sort of like how it is. We can't beat ourselves up for it. We just learn to get better with it and just be conscious and aware of what we say and what we disclose. Anything regarding our personal lives is self-disclosure, not only our criminal justice history or our substance use disorder history, but anything regarding our personal lives is self-disclosure. And we should be careful about what we disclose. Having said that, after working at Oasis for 17 years and monitoring hundreds of programs and reviewing programs and going into them, I can say that the notion of self-disclosure among professionals runs the gamut from we expect you to self-disclose to you get fired immediately if you self-disclose.
Yes, depending on the nature of the work.
Depending on the nature of it. But speaking as a counselor, though,
yeah.
And counselors in most therapeutic communities are expected to self-disclose their criminal justice history, their substance abuse history, and anything and everything regarding that. There's a mindset in many therapeutic communities that if you haven't done what I've done, then how can you help me with my problem? How can you identify? How can you help? You know, what do you know about what I've been through?
Yep.
On the other end, there are programs where if you say anything that's self-disclosing, you can be fired on the spot.
Yep.
So it's not all black and white, and it's not always that easy to discern. We just have to be mindful and careful about keeping our personal lives and our personal business to ourselves, and perhaps only those self-disclosing when it's the last resort and when it's in the best interest of the client.
And again, I will add to that, go back to what Wendy said earlier, and Elisa, we're coming right to you. Go back to what Wendy said earlier, is what I'm asking all of us to consider in this learning community is being intentional when we do choose to self-disclose. If it's to make contact, we're doing it in a way, and Nina, I'm thinking of you as I say this, that we're doing it in a way that's appropriate to the moment, the depth and the degree. And as Reginald said, we don't want to shift the focus to us. We want to keep the focus on them. And Reginald makes such a great point, because there are probably people in this learning community where you have been employed because of your lived experience. And it's a resource that you've been invited to bring to the conversation. And you can be intentional about that so that your emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being are maintained and you're doing the best you can for the client. Elisa, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I guess mine it kind of ties in really to everybody that shared, but naturally I feel like I'm an empath. I feel very deeply. I hurt with and for people, and I feel like for me, as far as, you know, trying not to overshare and respecting those boundaries, it's not just, you know, on account of who we serve and who we're working with. It's also on my end, because I've been on the receiving end of, you know, when somebody else overshared, and like I said, I feel things very deeply, and it's, you know, it can be very detrimental even that way. So I just try to keep that in mind, and, you know, how I operate as a peer. And, you know, we're the local mental health authority where I'm at, so I do keep that in mind, just because, you know, not everybody operates like me, but I know there are people, definitely a lot of people that do. And I just, you know, I know how deep and how, you know, bad some of the pieces of my story can sound, you know, just to myself. So I definitely keep that in mind all the time, because I don't ever want somebody to get, you know, secondary trauma based off of what I have disclosed with them. Trying to help them, I really cause more harm. So
Exactly. And further rationale for why we want to be focusing in this conversation. I'm going to give the floor to Branda and then to Reginald. And we're starting to move toward the conclusion of our conversation. So just wanted to let you know that. Go ahead, Branda.
I actually was just putting a clapping up to what Alicia said.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. Reginald, go ahead.
She just reminded me of something. It's that the fact that we have gone through an experience doesn't make us qualified to necessarily use our experience as a guide for someone else. If you've been, for example, if you've been a survivor of domestic violence, that doesn't make you qualified to counsel on domestic violence. If you've been a survivor of any type of abuse or trauma, it doesn't qualify you to counsel other people on that. The overwhelming majority of ethical violations that happen in the substance use disorder field happen through well-meaning counselors behind closed doors, counseling outside of their area of expertise, counseling outside of that area that they've been licensed to counsel. So when you find yourself going there, even if it's something that you've been through, you know, that someone else has said earlier, it's sort of like what got you clean may get me high. So just because you went through a certain situation, you get what I'm saying? Outside of substance abuse doesn't qualify you to counsel other people on that. So we need to learn how to stay in our lanes to avoid oversharing and perhaps re-traumatizing and doing harm.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for adding that, Reginald. I'm going to share my screen, a couple of additional things as we start to bring our conversation to a close to consider. They really kind of underline some of what we've been talking about already. But the way to avoid, and these are just some basic guidelines, we're going to send you a copy of these slides, to avoid auto-disclosure is to think about or answer these questions. You know, why now? And why this particular part of the story? And what do I intend? Am I hoping to achieve by telling it, if I'm going to choose to tell it? Am I triggered? So who is this actually for? And this was mentioned earlier, also asking permission. If you've answered these other questions and determined that now might be a good time to share a bit of your story or to make a disclosure, you know, there's something from my experience that, you know, might be helpful to you. Would it be all right if I shared that with you? So again, we're being intentional and we're also being person and client centered because the person may not want that at that particular moment. So I think we've answered this idea of why we want to avoid auto disclosure, and there are probably many other answers that we could come up with in regard to that. Yeah, and Daniela writes, I love the acronym WHAT? Why am I talking? Yes, I like that too. It's a good one. So keeping in mind boundaries, again, they are so that you can stay emotionally, physically, and spiritually safe and within practical, programmatic, and ethical guidelines. Also, they're going to hopefully keep you and those you interact with safe, healthy, and independent because you don't want to make people dependent upon you. And these ideas of boundaries, we all have our own personal boundaries. The agency may have boundaries. The program may have specific boundaries around job descriptions or tasks, as our colleague was referring to. Some situations you're intended to disclose, others you may not be. Also, the person you're working with, they have boundaries. And we can always reflect on what has happened, what is happening, and we can check in with ourselves and check in with others to sort of receive feedback about what we may be doing. And I really appreciate that this learning community is focused on this process of growth, that we learn as we do this, and we can develop an intentional element to what we're doing. Keeping in mind that the greater we have in common with that person, the more maybe links that we have through the disclosure or through the experience, whether you've made a disclosure or not, the greater need for the boundaries. Also keeping in mind that stress, if you're particularly stressed or if you're particularly triggered, that can erode boundaries, and that may mean seeking additional support, wellness or self-care activities. And of course, the idea of resisting secrets. We want to make sure that we're talking to our trusted colleagues, our supervisors, our teams about our experience and what's going on. So the idea of that lived experience can be a double-edged sword, and just keeping that in mind, that it can be a very powerful and very beneficial thing, and we also want to make sure that we don't let it overwhelm or overtake us. So again, for successful employment of our lived experience, it's important for us to know ourselves and to continue to grow and find out who we are, that we are willing to be self-aware about where we're coming from, what we're doing, that we have our own personal and employment boundaries and we're clear about those. And if they're starting to get blurry or fuzzy, we check in with trusted colleagues, supervisors, therapists, whomever we may be getting our support from. And that we're always doing ongoing assessment. We're checking in with ourselves, we're checking things out with other people. And we're aware of countertransference. Does this person remind me of somebody? Am I interacting with them the way I interacted with my ex or my mother or my brother? Because it's human, it happens, and we can also do what we need to do to remain professional in the face of it. And asking for help and support when and if we may need that. So remember that your lived experience is an invaluable asset, and we want to be intentional about the use and the management of it. You may identify with somebody's experience, but your experience is not the same as their experience. As our colleagues have said, there are many different roads to the mountaintop or to Vegas or wherever. We may have things in common, but it's not the same. And as was said earlier, what may be right for us could do harm for them. And we want to make sure we avoid that. So before I show the last two slides, I just want to stop and ask, any thoughts, any reactions about where we are right now in our learning community conversation? Is there anything that anybody wants to say? Anything you want to underline or comment on at this particular point?
I want to underline the fact that I want to take every single class that you teach. I want to underline that.
Greg, thank you very much. I'm very
That's
thank you.
That's what I do, Greg. I look for his classes.
Thank you. I'm very touched by that. Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So folks, one final thought. It's a reiteration of something we said before, but one final thought I'd like to share with you. And then we will, I'll share the QR code that you can scan to complete the evaluation. And my colleague, Clyde Frederick, will also put the link in the chat. And while I can still see you, because when I'm showing the slides, I can't see you, I just cannot thank you enough for making this the learning community that it's been today, for your generosity and for your focus and for your openness to really speak about your experience. Thank you so much. It's really been an honor to facilitate this learning community today. So thank you for that. And again, I'm going to just remind you of one thought. I'm repeating something that we've said before, and then we'll show you the last slide. And I hope that we'll be in future learning communities together as well. So thank you so much.